For the second consecutive race, Max Verstappen has had his shine stolen by a driver who finished outside the front row. This time, 18-year-old Oliver Bearman is the culprit. Despite winning comfortably in Saudi Arabia, the three-time world champion was forced to share the spotlight with Bearman, who was drafted in to replace Carlos Sainz a few hours before qualifying. It was a huge career milestone for the teenage sensation, who became the third youngest driver to compete in F1. Join us as we reveal everything Verstappen said about Bearman's incredible Jeddah performance. The inevitable happened once again in Saudi Arabia, where Red Bull completed a 1-2 finish. Max Verstappen spearheaded the victory as expected, but ultimately it was Oliver Bearman, a Ferrari-schooled rookie racer, who got all of the attention. And for good reasons. The British teenager found himself in the limelight after he was announced as the replacement for Carlos Sainz, who was diagnosed with appendicitis. Before then, very few people knew about Oliver Bearman and his reputation as a promising racer. But in the next 24 hours, he'd become one of the hottest prospects in motor racing. With only 1 hour of practice under his belt, Bearman hopped into the Ferrari SF24, looking to earn himself a good starting position. Despite being unprepared and inexperienced, the Essex-born driver almost knocked out Lewis Hamilton from Q2.
From Stevenage, champion!
Champion, 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 champion,
Champion of the world!
The 7-time world champion escaped by just 0.03 of a second, but Bearman had successfully thrown down the gauntlet to other drivers on the grid, and he emphasised this in his post-qualifying interview. I woke up this morning focused on my F2 race, and then at some stage it was clear that I had to get in the F1 car, Bearman said. Of course, huge best wishes for Carlos in his recovery, but it's a great moment and opportunity for me, and I'm ready to maximise it. As the lights went out in Jeddah, the youngster set out to do exactly what he had promised in that interview. In the SF24, he has a fast car that could power him up the field. But with the complexity of the track and the quality of drivers he was competing against, the teenager had to produce something special. I mean, this is the pinnacle of motor racing, and no driver will give up their place without a fight. In the early stages of the race, Bearman looked like he was just trying to get comfortable in the car and keep up with the momentum. However, a crash by Lance Stroll in lap 7 would open the path for him to climb up the field. As soon as the safety car was introduced, the young debutant was called into the pit lane, and by the time he returned to the track, he was brimming with pace and confidence. He pulled a brilliant overtaking move on Yuki Tsunoda. Next up, he squeezed past Zhou Guanyu, who put up very little resistance. Then, after a couple of attempts, he passed Nico Hülkenberg. By lap 21, Oliver Bearman was coasting in P9. And as the race wore on, he climbed up further to P7 after Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton went into the pit for a tyre change. Norris and Hamilton would later try to chase down Bearman, who was now racing on worn tyres, but the 18-year-old showed great composure to hold them off as he crossed the finish line in 7th position. Speaking in the post-race interview, the teenage sensation revealed the struggles he faced during the race. Physically, it was a very difficult race, Bearman said, especially in the end. When I had the 2 guys on soft behind me, I had to push flat out, and it was a mentally difficult race as expected. And physically, I was struggling too, but great fun out there. At the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix makes him the 3rd youngest driver to feature in an F1 race, and the first British driver to race for Ferrari since Nigel Mansell in 1990. Also, his P7 finish earned him 6 points, which means he becomes the 3rd youngest point scorer in F1 and the first British racer to score points on his F1 debut since Paul di Resta in 2011. As someone who made his F1 debut at 17 years and 166 days old, Max Verstappen can relate to Bearman's story. And during his post-race interview, the Dutch racer was full of praise for the teenage sensation. What Ollie has done has been very, very impressive, Max said. I watched his first few laps in practice because that is where you can judge if someone is comfortable in the car. And by lap 2 or 3, I thought that is a strong start. And to be 11th and only 0.6 off the pole at the time is more than you could have asked for. Speaking further about Oliver Bearman and the hectic hours that led to his brilliant debut, Verstappen said, I hope of course he also enjoyed it a little bit out there because it's quite stressful when you come into a new team. Basically a new car and without any experience on this track. so hopefully he's happy with himself. Also, not that he says, I didn't make it to Q3 or whatever, because I think everyone within the paddock has seen that he did a great job. Safe to say, Verstappen enjoyed Bearman's performance, but the Red Bull racer wasn't the only driver on the grid who was impressed by the youngster. Before we reveal who the other drivers are, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel for other exciting F1 content like this one. Now back to Oliver Bearman's iconic debut. In the thick of the race, 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton spared a few seconds to applaud Bearman. The young Brit acknowledged the recognition from his senior colleague with a thumbs up. It was a show of love and affection that is rarely seen among F1 drivers, especially when racing at high speed. After the race, Hamilton hugged Bearman and hailed his performance, saying, "To be pulled out of your class and put straight into a Ferrari and then go straight into practice, he did such a phenomenal job, and it has just showed he is a really bright future star." These words of encouragement from multiple world champions like Verstappen and Hamilton certainly meant a lot for Oliver Bearman, and you can understand why. When Hamilton made his F1 debut back in 2007, Bearman was just a year and 10 months old. Now at 18, he's competing side by side with Hamilton and other great drivers at the highest level of motor racing. I grew up watching these guys fighting, and it was nice to share the track with them, Bearman said. It was a pleasure to have their recognition. Aside from Verstappen and Hamilton, other F1 veterans also expressed their admiration for Oliver Bearman and his impressive performance at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. 1996 world champion Damon Hill hailed the young British racer on his X account, saying, "A star is born now. To jump in at such short notice on a track as intimidating as Jeddah, in a Ferrari of all things, and hold up under immense pressure from Lando and Lewis and keep it together. Wow." Bearman's teammate on the day, Charles Leclerc, also had good things to say about the 18-year-old. "It's definitely one of the most difficult tracks on the calendar for sure," Leclerc said, "being a street track and so fast as well, but he handled it perfectly." George Russell was another F1 driver who was amazed by Bearman's debut, and the Mercedes driver is already tipping his compatriot to make the step up to Formula One next season. "I fully expect to see him on the grid next year or the one after," George Russell said. He did an amazing job coming in at a circuit like this, which is extremely difficult. He exceeded everybody's expectations, and he caught a lot of people by surprise. He clearly had confidence from the off to push the car to the limit. With Leclerc already at Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton joining the team at the end of this campaign, Bearman would need to look for a seat somewhere else on the grid. Given his impressive debut, there's an outside chance that Mercedes could offer him a contract, but realistically, he looks good enough to drive for some of the teams further down the grid. For instance, a seat at Haas could be possible considering he has driven for the team in 2 different practice sessions last season. But what do you think? Does Oliver Bearman deserve to drive in F1 next season? Let us know in the comments section below.